Hello, my name is Fraser Simons. This is my channel, Springboard Thought. Today I'm doing another weekly review, Friday reads, but on a Monday, recorded on a Sunday, whatever you want to name it. And it's technically 9 books that I've read. One was the Booktube prize book, the only one that I hadn't read yet, so I can't talk about that. And so I'll briefly say what that is at the end, but it won't be too important because I can't say anything about it. So it's another 8 books. First book I consumed on audio only via Audible was Lote, which is part, I guess, of a 20 in 2020 initiative. The narrator is not mentioned, Zawe Ashton, looks like. And this initiative, as far as I know, it's 20 books in 2020 published specifically Black authors or creators of some kind, I think, in the UK, all by the specific publisher that set like a record in doing so. And this book was fantastic. The narration was phenomenal. And I actually ordered the book right after I completed it because, like always, generally, I tend to believe that when I consume something on Audible or audio, the more complex it is, the less I'm able to like steep myself in the intricacies and like understand it fully. But counterpoint to that is I will always listen to an audiobook over the text if it feels like it has a style or perspective that I don't jibe with, and then it will skate over the prose issues that I have generally. So it's a give and take situation, but this was free, I think, somehow for Audible. It might have been a free book of the month or just something random that was in the Plus catalog, something like that. It was astounded me that it was free because it was a brand new release basically at the time, like a year ago when I got it, and have finally just gotten around to it. It's dark academia in the sense of not just the aesthetic of dark academia, but ironically steeped in aesthetics anyway, because it is about a Black woman in academia and exploring the darkness of academia, the problems with it, the systemic issues, the institutional privilege and harm that it inflicts on people, and then systematizes into every facet of the thing that is interacting with it, including the people that are indoctrinated essentially by it. This woman is a really excellent character that I think breaks the normal archetype of what Black people are generally constructed to be in fiction. She doesn't have to have like Black excellence, nor does she feel mediocre. She doesn't have like a puritanical sense about her for her ethics. She's just a phenomenally well-rounded character. And we find out that she's sort of like a, not identity thief, but like takes on these different personas as she reinvents herself in different locations and doing different jobs, finding her way, and continues to, like discard these identities as she traverses. She steals things. She is obsessed with a very particular aesthetic and time period in which essentially she is trying to get at the heart of beauty at a cultural level and not codify it, but like try to understand it enough as it relates to Black culture, Black people, marginalized people, queer people especially as well, and who gets to decide about beauty, what it does for that person, like the agency it affords, and then the lack of agency at a systemic racist level that removes people from history and from whole cultures and from the general gestalt of mainstream pop culture and everything as well. And it was just completely fascinating. I think, ironically, a few people didn't get on with the book because it becomes decadent itself sometimes. Like, the adornment that it wears when our protagonist is like navigating this scene, traverse areas that she's not allowed in, and spend lots of money and like just consume as much decadence and opulence as possible, then the section itself is kind of bogged down. Like there's a style meets form function to that section that does necessarily bog it down, but because it was so thematically appropriate, yeah, I bumped it up to 5 stars from like a 4.5 instead of down to 4. So yeah, it was just a very excellent book. I am curious what the reading experience is going to be like because I have the text coming. Next, I read Orlando by Virginia Woolf, which is right here. And this is a terrible cover, I think, really. I mean, it's fine, I suppose, but all the other ones that I've seen, like the Penguin Classic or Modern Classic or Vintage Classic, something like that, the white covers that are really nice with like a portrait on it, I like a lot, but whatever. This one was like $2 or something, so can't really complain. This was fantastic, and I actually don't really want to talk about it too much because I didn't know much going into this book other than it was about interrogating identity at like a gender level that I thought would be political, but it's actually like way more substantive than that. But I feel like talking about it kind of robs the like magical quality, the emergent qualities that come out of the book as you're consuming it. Like I was very aware as I was going through this book that I was enjoying it far more because I had no idea about central key issues about this book that would be included at the back of the book. Yeah, right away they talk about it. So yeah, I think I'll just add to the hype and say that it's definitely worth it. There is, as Remembered Reads has mentioned before, some problematic elements in racism towards Asian culture. I think in this one it's South Asian, but I can't remember exactly. And I guess that's a through line throughout her work. And she was the first one that pointed that out to me. I had not paid attention to that when I was consuming other books of hers, so that was interesting and worth noting. But I do think this has a lot of merit. I can see why it's kind of like a queer staple, LGBT staple. It's definitely a book that I'll reread in the future. I got a lot out of it, and it's just a wild ride. I'll definitely watch the movie with Tilda Swinton after this. Next is actually the Chrysalids, which I held up before on accident. This, I think, was actually one of the books in school that we could have read, and I actually chose not to. So, the Chrysalids is set in Labrador. It's speculative fiction in the future. I don't think it mentions exactly when. Doesn't seem like it. But it's post a Third World War type situation. So it has a lot of like Cold War mixed into the, it was written in 1941, I believe. So what I noticed in it is the dystopia is constructed in such a way that it's got like nuclear anxiety to the max because it was after, or no, it would have been after 41. Whenever it was written, it was at the time that science was just reporting mutations from the fallout of Hiroshima. Hiroshima? I'm not sure if I've said that out loud before. Anyway, everybody knows where it was, what happened. So the fallout of it, people who thought they were quite safe and like across distances in China and Korea and stuff, I believe, were having complicated issues around childbirth and other features from the fallout. It was determined later from nuclear stuff. And so this like kind of springboards off of that and has a community in the future in Labrador, Canada, with climate change has already changed. It's like a temperate climate, which it shouldn't be. And they're sort of like, maybe like not Quakers, but yeah, like kind of like Quakers. It's a feudalistic community that has erupted again, and it seems kind of normal in the beginning, but it's steeped in like puritanical notions around keeping the body pure around the human body reflecting God's image, and they're very like Nazi-esque about it. If anything is born with a deviation, then they get rid of it, and they will report the mother if that happens 3 times or more, and then exile them or kill them, something like that. So everybody is living in constant fear, and this is a coming-of-age story with a very refined, excellent voice, in which the person develops a deviation where he is essentially telepathic. I don't think they call it that in the book. It's like thought speak, something like that. And more people are developing this deviation, and they have their own collective. So it's like in-group, out-group dynamics. It has coming-of-age tropes that everybody will notice, like the dad is a kind of like a drunk, puritanical preacher type sort who beats his kids, is like looking out for his, like kind of like snitchy and like looking out for other deviations, reports them, and is of course very like hypocritical. And so it's very interesting because it's paired very much with the coming of age stuff that you would know, with a really excellent voice, again, I'll reiterate, with this like dystopia fallout thing. And essentially inciting incident ensues, and they have to keep the secret or else flee. But then there's also his normal life, his falling in love with a girl, and all this other kind of stuff. So it was just fantastic, and it's very short read, like 200 pages. Yeah, exactly. Definitely recommend it. I was pleasantly surprised. My Transgender Coming Out story by Parker Marie Molloy, who I hadn't heard of before at all. But I'm going to do the Stand With Trans Kids tag, and wanted to have consumed more content with that to recommend that I hadn't seen before. And this was a good coming of age story that was like, essentially think of it as like a short story. And I haven't heard of this person at all, so I'm not too sure. There is some controversy when I looked her up before, where she had said something like really gross to another trans person and was put on a watch list, and then nothing since then has happened, and she writes for articles about trans issues. So it seems like she's okay now, but I'm not sure. But the story was really interesting because it's not part of the like master story. She came into her trans identity around 27, 28, something like that, I think. And so it's not part of the whole like, I knew right away when I was a kid. I figured it out right away. I got transitioned, and then dealing with this stuff. It's more about coming to it much later, the difficulties of that, mentioning some work stuff in terms of what she experienced when she was presenting as a man, and then afterwards what she experienced being on both sides of the aisle in that way. And it's just, yeah, really tight, crisp. It's like 42 pages, so about an hour or so on Audible, and it was free on the Plus catalog. And yeah, it did exactly what it set out to do. It is a little bit meandering, and I think she has such a personality that the people coming to this will know who she is, and that's why it's structured the way it is. She mentions certain things that aren't, I would say, strictly pertinent to the story that she's trying to tell. She digresses sometimes, and yeah, so it definitely feels like she's articulating it to a fan base that I wasn't a part of already, but I still was able to get a lot out of it. Next, I consumed Solaris, the definitive edition on Audible. I also have this version. Greg, from I think Another Bibliophile Reads, warned me about this. The actual author, Lem, had said that this is a bad translation. He didn't stand by it, didn't like it. It's the only one available in English other than an ebook and an audiobook, the one that I got. So as I was reading, I was actually sometimes comparing to what was said, and it is actually pretty different. This sort of waters it down. It's a lot less complex prose. The sentence structure is somewhat odd. Like, it'll put the last sentence first and not expound on certain details. Dialogue is a little bit different. I wouldn't say it's strictly bad. Like, I don't know how to really evaluate these things, but everyone I know who's consumed it on paperback still absolutely love this book. even though it is not as good a translation, and it does leave some of the complexities off of the page. But it has like the meat and potatoes of it, and it's definitely readable. It doesn't have like lots of errors and stuff like that, so I would have never known that it was a bad translation unless I had been actively comparing it to this one. So as for the actual book, I gave it 5 stars. Oh, by the way, Transgender coming out story, 4 stars. Chrysalids, 4 stars. Orlando, 5 stars. Lote, 5 stars. So it's been good so far. Solaris is, as far as I can see, basically like just pinnacle classic science fiction that is excellent. Like the prose are phenomenal, dialogue is phenomenal, the progress of the plot is incredible. Like there's essentially, I guess, 4 or 5 twists, none of which I saw coming. It has questions at the heart of it that are posed without being prescriptive and indeed are kind of like impossible to answer, which is kind of my favorite. And it's about a psychologist who's sent to a station to establish a new breakthrough with an alien presence that they're kind of unaware of what it actually is, but it presents as like a planet-like surface that can concoct like different reactions based on what they're bombarding it with. And they have like a kind of breakthrough with I think it was like x-rays. When they send it down, it reacts in a certain way, and so they needed a psychologist to kind of like figure things out. But it's kind of interrogating the notion that I love a lot and that most science fiction doesn't bother with, is the anthropomorphization of all things alien, so that the reader can understand it and kind of usually take away a different theme. But fundamental, the linguistics, the ways in which the methodology, ontology, everything basically to do with alien life is predicated on notions that we have sort of steeped in the general intellect and science fiction and everything, that like we could understand these questions when we probably can't. It is probably some questions out that are completely unknowable, especially since there are questions about ourselves that we have not answered yet and might be fundamental, or at least instrumental in forming a first contact situation. So it is, yeah, getting at the roots of like the human experience, the ways in which we don't know ourselves informing our future, and just, yeah, kind of almost like a post science fiction book essentially, where it's interrogating all of the core aspects of first contact stories and disassembling it. And there is some pretty hard sci-fi in it, but I didn't mind. Like it goes into actual science around certain aspects that would be a spoiler, but it explains these things in a way that I thought was really interesting. But if somebody didn't, that chapter especially would be rough. But even just plot-wise, I think anyone would think it was riveting. I absolutely loved it. One of my all-time favorites now for science fiction, especially mind-blowing for classics, especially after reading Do Android Dreams of Electric Sheep, which I'll have a review of soon, which I found lacking at a stylistic prose level, especially, where this is just phenomenal. Driven, The Secret Lives of Taxi Drivers. I got this off Libby, and the author himself, I think Marcello de Cintio, is narrating it himself, I believe. And this was, I don't have too much to say about it. It's 4 stars. It is executed very well. It's a good piece of journalism. At the start, he compiles a whole bunch of different stats about taxi drivers, demographics, gender split, ethnicities, and sort of what that might say about Canada. And then he went around the country and interviewed a whole bunch of different people and sort of embodied those statistics to see if they were correct or not, and simultaneously kind of allowed these people to voice their stories. There's a lot of like immigrant stories that are sometimes quite wild, There's some fantastic ones about female cab drivers. There's one particular woman who's just incredible. Really goes after whatever she wants to do, basically. Just a really interesting personality, and was married to a Muslim man and Muslim herself too. So it was just, there's a lot of interesting intersections to the stories, as you probably would expect from taxi drivers. And it kind of interrogates stereotypes and different like assumptions that people make about taxis, whether you like them or not. And then also talks about like the Uber situation too. Then I read The Magician, Tobin. This was the book that I read for the Booktube prize, so I can't say anything about it. But if you're clever, maybe you can see how I thought about it just by reading my face. No? Next, I read The Apprenticeship, or The Book of Pleasures by Clarice Lispector. As you can see, this engaged me very critically. It's a very short little book, 150 pages, even with an afterword that was pretty cool, by the translator, maybe, not sure. The translator being Stefan Tobler, 2021. And I think this is on the Booktube prize. It's in some prize contention right now, or was last year. This is it has a plot, somewhat. I wouldn't say that it's the main reason to come to this story, though. It is about a woman who meets a man who essentially tells her straight up that she needs to do some internal work in order for them to be together. They're very attracted to one another. They feel like something like kinship, something like trying to see if they are compatible people, but him, I don't know, giving her homework, I guess, first. He is an older man who is a professor, and she is a youngerish woman with a teaching degree of 5 years, so we can kind of surmise. I don't really know how it works overseas or Latin America or whatever, but if she went into school right away, maybe she's like mid-20s, right? Something like that. Certainly no more than 30, so he is probably double her age. This chronicles solely her story from her perspective, with a stream of consciousness like prose, kind of like Hilda Hilst, kind of like Miss Dalloway type situation, but very stylistically individualistic to her, for sure. Like, you would not see these prose and be like, oh, this is kind of like Woolf or something. It's very distinctly hers, and it's excellent. The dialogue I thought was really interesting, because it feels like the dialogue serves a different purpose in this than with other books. They feel like they're voicing their subconscious or innermost thoughts. Like, while dialogue is always a distillation of what the character is trying to articulate to another person in the way that kind of respects the reader and conveys like the most interesting way what they're trying to say, and usually advance different craft work in the actual story as well. This also seems to be like a distillation further of that, where it's like their subconscious, the heart of the thing that they don't want to voice to the other person because it's so vulnerable, is the thing that ends up being voiced. And because it's like a unreliable narrator type thing, it's like very interesting, because maybe the filter is simply her, right? She's recounting the story, so maybe she has spliced in this dialogue for a specific purpose, and it's to chronicle how she got to point A to B. The whole story is basically will they, won't they. That's the entire conflict. So again, it's unconventional. It's almost like a post-romantic or romance book, because it's interrogating the notions of what a conflict will be in a romance novel, because solely the conflict is within her. She needs to do the work internally, spiritually, in so far as like her advancing her self-worth, her self-love, her idea of the world, essentially. Like, her spirituality advances everything about her, and it's very like ephemeral and fleeting. So there's a lot of like epiphanies and stuff like that that come to her and then, you know, float out on the veranda that she can never see again, or like dreams where she has something very vivid and then it floats away when she wakes up. And essentially she has to decide simultaneously if she's going to continue to pursue this man as well, who is like seeing other women at the same time. And it's not provoking jealousy in her, like it's a very like dramatic Liss type situation that is occurring, yet simultaneously riveting for me. They're both very insufferable people at some points. What she sees of herself in the mirror and interrogates there and examines is essentially what she has to do the work on. Like, she needs to distill exactly who she is and be able to articulate it and assuming like present it to this man in order for the relationship to proceed outside of friendship. But they still see each other, they still speak, and they still feel like this internal damage essentially as they move throughout the world without each other, yet know that they're not right for each other at that time. And they're also unlikable people. But I also thought that it lends itself very well to a queer reading, which is very fascinating to me. She's like essentially demisexual, or demi-romantic, I should say, in which she is unable to feel passion in a sustained way and like want to be in a romantic relationship with him until she gets to know herself and that person to a certain degree, and then it sort of unlocks. So obviously it wasn't written in that way, but the queer reading is almost like a one-to-one ace spectrum, probably demisexual and gray ace reading, and it's like verbatim, like she is essentially displaying at all times that sexuality. So I thought that was fascinating, and I just love the prose work. So yeah, absolutely 5 stars. Lots and lots and lots of engagement critically, and I read it with the fabulous Roz from Skelly Dandling about the book, and Alan and Una from Codex Cantina, both of whom I've only just gotten to know from those readathons on Voxer, or group reads, I guess, not readathons. So yeah, fantastic. And then lastly was this little gem. This is Happiness by Neil Williams, and that, how to talk about this? This is essentially like a coming-of-age story in Ireland, and it's about an Ireland that no longer exists except for in his memories. It is completely fascinating because it's literally like something I could not picture myself. There's sections of, for instance, when he's talking about the first electrician in the town to ever come, because there hasn't been electricity yet, and they have to hook up all the towns first before the actual like flip is switched and they actually are given electricity. And it's just a very comical, fabulous scene in which the electrician is like looking at these houses and he's like saying a range of this would take a small miracle to like this is a really challenging, no doubt, and extra fees and extra costs and blah blah blah. Where he walks in the living room is like, I suppose you want a light in here, and everyone's like, yeah, if it's not too much trouble, right? It's like the central area of the house, that kind of thing, but they don't want to piss him off, basically. And there's a lot of different stuff like that. It also loosely chronicles the friendship between a teenager and an older man in a really like healthy kind of way, I thought, like wholesome kind of way. There's definitely like doom and gloom and death in this, but its counterpoint is always towards what happiness is, and chronicling or like creating a memory, I guess, of or an encapsulation of this time period and this small idyllic small town, and what makes it idyllic, why his memories are colored that way. And then it's also, some people would say, overwritten, but is kind of fabulous because if you cut off the sentences, you'd essentially like chop off at the knees the very thing that makes the voice compelling in this. It's exceptional in its authorial voice. He's such a character. He's fantastic to read about. He's smooth, sly. he's just like, yeah, completely fascinating, and he articulates thoughts that could be in contemporary prose very boring, but are like circuitous, to do with diction, musicality, and the construction of a sentence, and just sort of having fun and showing off, I think, which suits the character to a T. So mostly the reason to read this is the introspection, and just dwelling in the voice that is crafted here. I gave it 4 stars. Most people I saw had universally gave it 5 stars on Goodreads, which I pretty much haven't seen before. I follow people that I both don't respect the opinion of and people that I do, and they seem unanimously united in their love of this novel. So that's why I picked it up, and I definitely think that it is an incredible piece of writing. It is, yeah, wildly, like, some people would call it flowery, maybe, stuff like that, but it's definitely the best articulation of what he is trying to say, because it is so pleasurable to consume the actual sentence, even though it might be like considered overwritten or whatever. So that's it. If you've read any of these books, I'd love to know what you thought. If you have any of these on the TBR, did I push you over the edge? If you know if I'm pronouncing this name correctly, you should let me know. And otherwise, if you have any thoughts, comments, opinions, whatever, put them in the comments section, and I will see you next video, which will be a tag, I believe. Bye.